Welcome, Matt Bateman, to Empowering Educators, Transforming Learning Environments through Uniting Body, Mind, and Spirit. I'm really, really excited and honored to have you with us here. It's Dr. Matt Bateman, and you are the Executive Director of the Montessorium. And I'd love for you to tell us about what that means and who you are.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and for thinking of me and for reaching out. I'm super excited to talk about transformation and mind, body, and spirit and all these wonderful meaty topics that are really close to my heart in education. I work about 6 years ago, 6 years and change ago, myself and 12 other people um, really wanted to do something big in education, and we wanted it to be about Montessori, like a Montessori moonshot. Like, let's kind of take Montessori to the next level. And we founded this company called Higher Ground Education, which is really at this point, 6 years in, it's kind of like an umbrella organization. So Higher Ground does several different things, all related to Montessori education. So we have schools, we have 100 schools across the world. Guidepost Montessori is the name of our early childhood and elementary schools. Academy of Thought and Industry is the name of our middle and high schools. So we've really worked on developing out a model for Montessori adolescents as well. We have a training center, the Prepared Montessori Institute, at which I am a trainer. I focus on theory training. That's my specialty. And then we also have this brand, this institution or organization, Montessorium, and that's my main job. At this point, I've done a lot of different things at Higher Ground, but I've become kind of an intellectual professorial type again, which is my roots. That's where I started. I'm an academic at heart and a philosopher at heart, and Montessorium is a think tank. It's we have a website, montessorium.com. We have kind of different initiatives on the history of education, on technology and education, on just the core philosophy of Montessori. You can go and check it out. We have courses, especially one on the history of education, where Montessori features very prominently. And we also run, we're exploring a little conference series called The Great Rethink in Education. So we do a lot of kind of thought leadership, and also like research, just trying to like take seriously the work of getting education right. What is actually true and right in education, and putting in the thought, both the analysis of scientific research, but also the humanistic thinking, the philosophy, the history. That's really our focus and our specialty, on understanding education with an eye towards the truth.
I am so of the same cloth of you. I love the inspiration. I think what an amazing job to get to think deeply about these important inroads in our society, and how we affect our children affects all of society. And so I'm thrilled that you're bringing that wisdom. I would love for you to talk to us especially about the influence of Montessori. I, as a Montessorian, am thrilled and connected and inspired within her scope. But I know that there's many educators that are listening that wish they might have had a little piece of her, or say, well, it's too late now. How could we
Too late.
understand her and invite her wisdom into the educational path, no matter where?
Yeah. So even if you've never heard of Montessori, if you've heard of her in a passing way, probably she's had more influence on your thinking in education and parenting than you realize. So she's a kind of funny character historically, in that Montessori was always like outside of the academy. Like, she never had like a chair of education at Columbia's Teachers College or anything like that. She was always, she was very, very well known during her time. But it was always grassroots. It was always like she ran her own trainings, and she published her own books, and she had her own little lecture circuits, and she had her own classroom experiments, and it grew organically out of that kind of grassroots work, and really internationally in this very global way. And it's pretty huge now. I mean, Montessori is the biggest kind of definite, kind of with a name, with a definite philosophy of implementation, alternative approach to education today, especially certainly in early childhood, but I think overall that's true. That's not to say that it's huge. I think it should be bigger, and the whole premise of my life and work is that it should be much, much bigger, like 20x bigger, 50x bigger than it is right now. But you know, in the alternative education space, it's really big. Another inroad that she's had to kind of influence the culture is she has had an impact on developmental psychology, and it's harder to trace this because if you take a typical developmental psychology course, you don't read Montessori. Like when you're kind of reading the big historical figures like Vygotsky and Freud and Piaget and Mead and Erickson and like Montessori isn't usually on the list. I think that she should be. I think that she's kind of a caliber of those other thinkers, and that's an unfortunate omission. But she was in dialogue with a lot of those people, and especially and most notably in the kind of Anglo-American world, the most, and in certain other realms as well, one of the most influential developmental psychologists was Piaget, who has a stage theory of children's cognition and development. And Piaget worked with Montessori. He was the president of the Swiss Montessori Society. He did a lot of his initial research at a Montessori school. It's hard to kind of, I don't think that we have great documentation as like what exactly was the collaboration. We have pictures of them together. We know that they were friendly, but I don't know if we have any correspondence. But Piaget is probably the most influential developmental psychologist on current developmental theory. And so she's kind of gotten them there as well. But there's just so many things, like even as a parent, like if you have child-sized furniture, like that's a Montessori innovation. Like if you use really innovative constructive geometry math materials, like Singapore math is a big one, where you're kind of doing visual proofs. You could like proofs, but it's brought down to the child's level. I mean, there's a long history of that, but Montessori is the kind of proximate preeminent thinker who did a lot of work thinking about what does a math education look like that's like very advanced and brought down very young, but very visual and very accessible and very exciting. And so a lot of math materials are based on Montessori materials. So she's probably influenced your thinking, even if you've never heard of her and you're kind of interested in parenting and education. That's what I'd say for starters. But there's all, I mean, my recommendation is that people like go and learn more, that they learn more about the life of Maria Montessori. There's a wonderful, phenomenal new biography of her by Christina. Sorry, there's sirens in the background. I'm in New York City. Christina Di Stefano has a new book called The Child as a Teacher that I really recommend. It's a great historical context. It gives the story of her life, but also is a good introduction to her pedagogy. If you're interested in the scientific research, like how do we know that Montessori interface, like what is the evidence? Look at Angeline Lillard's book, Montessori, the Science Behind the Genius. And Lillard is a really excellent top-rate researcher at the University of Virginia, which is a top-rate psychology department.
And what was
she's
the
really
title of that book?
Montessori, the Science Behind the Genius.
Okay.
And then there's a bunch of material on our website that you can use. It's more philosophical. It might not be, depending on your interest, it could be the best introduction in the world, or it could be not. And then there's always reading Maria Montessori herself. And if you're going to do that, I definitely recommend, with just my default recommendation is that you start with The Discovery of the Child, her main book.
Okay, so just to review those, Montessorium.com is your website, Montessorium, I-U-M.
Yeah.
And then, so there's tremendous resources on Montessori there. Then The Child as a Teacher, The Science Behind the Genius, Montessori. And the last one, what was the last one that you mentioned?
The last one is Montessori's. So Montessori had one, Montessori published a dozen books in her lifetime, at least, maybe even more. The main one, the first book that she published is, it became known as the Montessori Method. Her original title was An Introduction to Scientific Pedagogy, and it went through a bunch of editions. So she revised it over and over in the course of her life, and she tells her own story, and she lays out her curriculum and her approach and the way that she thinks of education. And the last edition of it is called The Discovery of the Child.
Okay. And so let's say one of the teachers says, well, I just don't have enough time to read. What would you say are the key principles to begin in action?
Oh my gosh, in action. The core thing that drew me to Montessori, and that I think she described over and over again in her lifetime and in her writing as the kind of core of her principle, is the incredible power that children have to engage in sustained, focused, concentrated work. And so if you kind of think of like an athlete or an artist, like Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel, like, and he's just obsessing over it, and he's in a flow state, and Like he forgets to eat and people have to kind of pull him away because he's like so into the work. Like that kind of work, that kind of deep work, deep focus, concentrated work. Montessori's view is that, I mean, Montessori's main discovery, and what she would describe as her main discovery, is that children are capable of that kind of work. And that when children engage in that kind of deep, concentrated work, for whether it's like an infant doing it for like 5 minutes, or a toddler doing it for 10 minutes, or a preschool child doing it for like an hour, that can happen. Where they're working with their hands, they're working on some material. They're not just kind of running around and playing. They're not engaging in imaginative work, but there's something in front of them that they're trying to accomplish, something purposeful. They're trying to fold a bunch of napkins in a certain way, or they're trying to sort through. They're trying to arrange and sort through Montessori sensorial materials, and we can talk about some of those. That just the fact of like they're focused, they're trying, they're like immune from distraction, like they want to do it over and over again. That's the thing that she thinks drives positive development. It's like so good for the mind, for the brain, for the character. It's hand, mind, and spirit, like all in one in that kind of activity. That she thinks like just don't interrupt. See what you can do to encourage it. A, B, don't interrupt it if it's happening. Like if a child's kind of in deep work, don't kind of ask them to transition. Don't jump in and rush in and like play with them and do it with them because you're so excited. Just step back, let it happen. Let the child do that kind of deep work. That's at the very, 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 that's the beating heart of Montessori practice, is how do you inspire and enable and protect prolonged, concentrated work with your hands.
Wow, beautiful. And tell us more.
um, yeah, I mean, the idea behind concentrated work is that children are at the very, very beginning of a journey of kind of establishing the self-world relationship. So and this comes up all the time in development, even if you don't think it's happening in development, like when toddlers throw temper tantrums. I have a 2-year-old, so I'm very familiar with toddlers throwing temper tantrums. It can seem inexplicable. It's often very understandable in terms of what the child is like, just starting to think about the world and just starting to think about what they themselves can do. And they kind of want to do things themselves, and they want to predict what's going to happen, and they want to have a sense of what's going to happen. And they just started on that journey, and it's so fragile. It's like they just figured out that they can kind of predict a routine, that when that routine gets disrupted in small ways, or when something isn't in place where they expected it to be, or when you give them the string cheese and it's broken in half instead of whole, and they break down and they throw a tantrum, what's actually going on there in a lot of cases is the child is trying to understand the world. The child is trying to get the world to be intelligible to them. And that process is broken down in some way that's unexpected to the child. And it's not the end of the world when that breaks down and they throw a tantrum. They're learning how to manage their emotions. So it's not like you're trying to avoid all tantrums, but it is like, how do we really feed that need to make the world intelligible and orderly, and to give the child confidence in doing that? And Montessori's answer is you kind of set up a very predictable world for the child, at least maybe not all the time. It's not like you don't have them like go outside and run around and play and get dirty in nature and do novel things with them. But there's a kind of core part of their experience that is orderly and beautiful and predictable and set up so that the child can understand it. And when you set that up, what will happen is that the child will get very, very engaged in that world and start to build up their confidence in being able to kind of grapple with it and deal with it and care for it and understand it in really, really deep ways. And that's just so fundamental to the human condition. I mean, fundamental to the human condition and fundamental to the good life is the sense that I can understand the world and I can act on the world, and I can be successful at doing those things. And that process, learning that, becoming confident in that, coming to the view that you can do that. Not everybody comes to this view. Like you can come to the view that like, yeah, you can understand little bits of the world, but fundamentally the world is incomprehensible, or fundamentally like I'm not that capable. Like there are all sorts of things that can happen to your mindset, to your psychology, to your spirit, to your character in life. And to kind of get on a healthy track where there's a foundation of confidence, of earned confidence, not just somebody giving you a participation trophy, but like, no, this child can actually do things and can actually understand things, and the child actually had those experiences and they put in effort and it was rewarded. Rewarded not by an adult giving them a sticker, but rewarded by success. That is that is just the kind of foundation of character development. It's the foundation of moral development. It's the foundation of cognitive development. It's just at the heart of what it means to kind of be a human and have a successful, flourishing life. And that starts very, very young.
And that difference between the sticker and versus the sense that I can do it is just so huge, because that
Yep.
brings us back to the power of the spirit of the child and why it's so important to have a prepared environment where they can flourish and have clear structure, but the freedom within that structure.
Yeah, I mean, part of what a child needs. So, um, in fact, everybody has a profound amount of responsibility for their lives. Over time, if you just think about adults, like ultimately adults are responsible for their lives, which isn't to say that you're a lone wolf and that you don't absolutely love and interface with other people and that there aren't all sorts of complex relationships with interdependence. Those are all true, and Montessori embraces all of those things wholeheartedly. But at the core of your ability to do those things in a healthy way, to have these wonderful relationships and interface with the world and to be benevolent, is a certain kind of self-possessiveness, a certain capacity to take responsibility for your own life and to do things and to be confident in your ability to do things. And that has to come from your choices and your self-direction. Like that responsibility is fundamentally a matter of you choosing to act or to think, or both. And you kind of trusting that even though it doesn't always work out, you have a basic capacity to figure it out. And that getting that sense of yourself unlocks everything, really everything else in life. It's just so fundamental. So yeah.
And the groundwork is begun young for that. And
Groundwork
so
has begun young. The groundwork has really begun at birth in Montessori's. You and I agree with her. I think, and this is where the developmental psychology comes in. I mentioned that Montessori was a pioneering developmental psychologist, and that she was a contemporary of Freud and Piaget and all these other thinkers. In the late 19th, early 20th century, this was a time when people realized that, oh crap, like early childhood is really important. The kinds of experiences that children have are really important, and that there's been echoes of that in history. So like you see the ancient Greeks arguing about like ancient Greeks argued about like should you swaddle babies or not. That debate is perennial. If you're a parent, you've probably heard all sides of it, like swaddling versus anti-swaddling. But in a way much deeper than that, in a way that's like, wow, like the foundations of character and mental health and like basic skills, they're happening before, like a lot of them start happening before the child can talk even, like attachment relationships, like there's a whole vocabulary that we have now that Montessori was really foundational in kind of figuring out and establishing in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
And so, I mean, there's a reason that she's grown so much internationally, and now it's been over 100 years, and there still is growth. There's more growth than ever, it seems to me, recently. There's a lot going on still in the Montessori field. And one of the things that you talked about that was so different for her was the importance of the child-sized furniture, the importance of making it accessible to the child. It's not like, no, don't touch, you
Yeah,
know, yes, please touch. Here's the things you can touch. Let's
yeah,
touch them conscientiously.
yeah.
So how do we bring those elements into our environments, even without, being
I mean,
necessarily Montessori trained?
yeah. So I mean, just a couple of things that I recommend to all parents, and this is something that educators can do too. Excuse me. Is simple thing that Montessori believed that was really controversial at the time, and that parents still kind of bristle at, and educators still bristle at: give children real, beautiful, breakable things. So, um, the little glass shot glasses that you can get from IKEA. I'll bet that IKEA sells like a million of those a year, and probably most of them are not used for shots. Like that this has become a known thing that like you can use them for children, use them to drink. And if the child drops it by accident or throws it across the room, it will break. It will break, and you'll have to stop and you'll have to clean it up. And the child will see that it's broken, and the child, you can even get the child to help sweep it up and throw it away. And children are, I mean, people think that like, oh my gosh, now the children will want to break everything, or like that's so dramatic, and or children don't care about that. Children do care. Children do care about that. It's very dramatic when something breaks, especially something precious and beautiful. They don't like it. Even if they're interested in it, they're sensitive to it. It's a learning experience for them. If you give them a plastic sippy cup, I don't have a sippy cup near me. to kind of hold and hold up its a demonstration, but nothing a child does to that sippy cup will have any effect on the sippy cup. They can drop it, they can hurl it across the room with great force. It will just bounce around. It is completely harmless. What they learn in interacting with a sippy cup is nothing that I do makes any difference, and everything is safe. And there's no kind of environmental incentive or feedback to be careful and to treat things with care. So breakable things starting in infancy, like, I mean, we in our infant rooms, and I in my parenting gave children. It's not like we never use sippy cups. I'm not saying like it's a sin to use sippy cups. We do use them sometimes. And it's nice for children to have water bottles when they're outside and when they're going to bed and things like that. But when they're sitting at a table, there's like a routine of like they're caring for this thing, and that. So it teaches them how to care for the environment. It teaches them to value it. It gives them kind of natural feedback. B, it's like harder to do. It's harder to kind of like hold a sip. It's heavy. You have to hold it with 2 hands. If you do it wrong, you spill it. The child is learning inhibitory control. The child is like really mastering themselves and getting fine motor control, which is a massive predictor of all sorts of things related to intelligence and academic achievement. Fine motor control. So that's one simple example of ways that you can set up your environment that display a greater trust in the child, to put more responsibility on the child, and that have really positive developmental outcomes in terms of the kinds of learning and behavior that it affords.
And that we don't overreact if it did break. I
Yeah.
like very much that you included, well, there's the broom and there's the dustpan, let's go get it, and helping to model.
Yeah. And even in like, so in a room, so our infant classrooms and a lot of Montessori infant classrooms, they start at 3 months old. So this is a classroom, a school environment. I think it's the right way to think about it as school. It starts at 3 months old. And it goes through, depending on where you are, 14, 16, 18 months old. So it goes kind of pretty far along into the toddler period. 3 months olds are not going to be using 3 month olds are not going to be using glasses to drink. They're not even able to sit up, so they can't kind of use their hands yet. They can't crawl around yet. 6 month olds sort of can, they can crawl around. So what happens when a 12-month-old is using a glass and drops it and breaks it? What happens is everybody in the room notices and everybody in the room stops. And even if only the teacher and the 12-month-old are kind of dealing with it, everybody watches that and models that. And like children are getting from a very young age, like, oh, like something broke, I have to be careful, I shouldn't crawl over there. The teacher is kind of gently keeping me from crawling over to where the glass is, and they're interested in it, so they sit and watch. And you get it very, very young. And the fact that the 6-month-old is seeing the 12-month-old deal with that, the 12-month-old is a lot closer to them than the adult. And so cleanup and dealing with fragile things, they see that this is within reach. This is going to happen soon. This is something that other children can do. This isn't just something for grown-ups.
Learning from one another is such a critical
Yeah.
piece.
I mean,
And
mixed age in Montessori is like, in the top 3 principles. So yeah, like you want a good range of ages in a classroom.
so it's 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12.
Yeah, there's these 3-year age bands. Often infant and toddler are broken up a little bit, kind of cut in half. But there's just so much happening at that age period that like the differences between a 3-month-old and an 18-month-old are like as vast, if not more vast, than the differences between a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. But yeah, you like there's something very unnatural. I mean, the normal way of doing it is like first graders are all 6, and second graders are all 7, and eighth graders are all 8, and it's 1-year age bands, and you spend 12 years of your life in K-12 school only with people of your age, and it's just bizarre. It's just like only in primary school and middle school and high school, that's the only time in your life when you have a social situation like that. Every other time in life, there's a mixture of ages, and people are naturally at different levels, and like people group on the basis of all sorts of things other than age. So we try to encourage that in Montessori classrooms too.
And within the multiple ages, then what happens is some of them naturally are emerging as leaders. Particularly, you want your older ones to help to lead the younger ones rather than the teacher always telling, right?
Yeah, so older students love mentoring, love being leaders, and they take on that responsibility. They take it seriously, and you'll even get phenomenon like at a Montessori school where there's kind of multiple classrooms of like elementary students go to the toddler rooms and they help out. They like read stories to the little kids, and they take it very seriously. Like they're like, these are little kids. We have to be careful. We have to talk to them in a certain way. It's just like only good things come of that. I mean, for all the reasons that it's good to have siblings and everything like that. And then the younger children, they get inspired. Nothing is as like if you're a parent, you will know that like, let's say that you're trying to transition from sippy cups to glasses and the child just isn't that interested. You've got an 18-month-old, and then you sit your 18-month-old at a table with 3-year-olds, and the 3-year-olds are using glasses instantaneously. Your 18-month-old is going to want to use a glass. Like they just get so inspired and connected by what's possible and what the older kids are doing. Like it's way more direct than what adults are kind of showing them or demonstrating or telling them what to do.
Mm. And another such a foundational piece that you mentioned briefly was the sensorial aspect. So when you talked about the development of the hand-mind relationship, right, that you had said that's fundamental. One of the things I appreciated very much in my Montessori work was understanding like writing actually kind of starts big and it gets smaller and smaller. And then I think, you know, if I'll use tongs, that I can develop these muscles and start to see how you can just simple things like transferring pom-poms from one bowl to another makes it all of a sudden much more interesting to use a tool that actually develops the muscles to write later on. I would love for you to tell us more just
Yeah,
about that sensorial aspect.
I mean sensorial, and also more broadly than that, just the Montessori curriculum. So part of the prepared environment, we've kind of talked generally about the environment being child size and having breakable things, but and that's fundamental. But the other kind of fundamental pillar of the Montessori environment is there's a learning curriculum. It's not just that children are meeting their own needs, and I don't want to underplay the importance of that. They're learning stuff. They're learning literacy. They're learning math, really advanced stuff. And the way that Montessori figured out how to do that for very young children, it's not drill and kill and like let's get the flashcards in early and like we're creating little math olympiads. It was very, very detailed and experimentally driven task analyses of what actually goes into complex cognitions like mathematics or complex tasks like writing, like reading and writing. And there's, if you think about writing, just take writing. There's so much that goes, or reading. There's so much that goes into that. You have to know the words. Like if you don't know what the word is that you're reading and you're parsing it, it's very hard. Like one of the biggest blockers to readers is actually just raw vocabulary. Like if you're reading a book that you don't know what any of the words means, like even if you know how to sound out the letters, it's very, very difficult. There's the motor control elements of writing. Like it's not easy to like hold a pen and write. There's alphabetism. There's kind of just knowing the phoneme grapheme mappings, knowing what the different letters mean and what they mean in combination. And Montessori took all these components and more and broke them down into like 17 steps. So toddlers start with phonics by playing sound games, by noticing rhymes, by noticing what words start with, by playing memory games. They start to build their vocabulary. Montessori toddler classrooms are very vocabulary rich. And what you said, they have materials. They have, so when a Montessori child does a puzzle, they're not just picking up the piece and putting it in. The puzzles have little pegs on them. And the way that you hold the peg is very, very similar to the way that you hold the pencil. And so the child is getting practice with the pencil. And then when you do table washing, the specific motion that we teach in table washing is the motion of holding. It's similar to the motion of holding your arm above the table. And all these things gradually get developed. And so first of all, the Montessori classroom is set up so that each and every one of these things is joyous to practice. Like, it's not like you're like, go wash the table, like 20 minutes a table. It's like inspiring, like children, like, and toddlers actually like doing chores. And so it's set up so that they can do it. And the same thing with the puzzles and the same thing with the sound games. These are things that children like to do. And so for the child, it's like a game or a kind of, or a work or something that they're interested in. But what it's indirectly adding up to is like the writing muscles, you're building a sense of phonemes, you're building a vocabulary. And then the materials start to get more advanced. So you start to actually get letters, and these things start to be linked together. So the children are tracing letters on what's called the sandpaper letters with their hands. It's this kind of psychomotor exercise where they're relating some of the sounds that they got in sound games to this fun tracing activity, to this very interesting tactile activity, and slowly learning letter sounds. Eventually you work up to, they're still not ready to write yet, even though they're practicing muscles. But they're ready to start spelling, but they can't write. And they don't know enough words to really start reading. So what do you do in that kind of situation? Well, that's where the movable alphabet comes in. This is what Montessori calls writing without writing. So you give children letters, beautiful cursive letters that they're learning with the sandpaper letters, and you have them start placing them together to sound out words and spell out words. And this continues. And this kind of really detailed, inspiring task analysis that's broken down into a curriculum that's part practical life and part sensorial, and it's this very complicated, very, very well sequenced, very thoughtful curriculum. You start to read and write when you're 3. I mean, the thing that Montessori got famous for in her lifetime, the first thing that put her on the map in 1907, is she took slum children in Rome, the poorest of the poor, destitute children that were growing up in awful conditions in the slums of Rome that have no analog in the US, certainly today. Like it was just really awful, like crime and darkness and destitution, abuse, trauma, all left and right, just like really, really intense slums. And she taught these 3-year-olds how to read and write. And she did it in this natural way where they were almost teaching themselves with the materials in the environment. And this was at a time when the wealthiest aristocratic child was not learning how to read and write until they were 6 or 7. And the thing that unlocks that, the kind of innovation that unlocks that, it is the curriculum. Like it is kind of analyzing the task of writing, breaking it down into components, experimenting with ways to teach children these components in a joyous way to get them to choose it, and making it natural, connecting it to their natural desire for language and sound at this age. It's really, I think, underappreciated how Montessori is. Yeah, Montessori is child-centered. It's a practice. It's about liberty. It's about respecting the child. It's all of those things, but also it's about a curriculum. It's definitely about a very, very impressive, rigorous, advanced curriculum that if all you want as a parent is for your child to get into Harvard or Stanford, like you could it's hard to do better than sending your child to a Montessori children's house classroom where they're going to be multiplying before they're in kindergarten, and they're going to be reading and writing when they're 3, and they're going to be, I mean, there's some variation around when exactly this happens, but it happens fast and it happens in a joyful way that's going to set the child up to want to do these things forever. So that was a mouthful, sorry.
Oh, such valuable information though, because I remember when I was teaching or in the classroom that she has the philosophy, well, if you're going to learn 1 through 9 as a little bead, well, then why not learn it also as the 10 and touch the 10 and feel the difference? And why not learn as the 100 and into the
Yeah.
thousands, so that they're already adding into the thousands at 3 as well.
Yeah, I mean, the place value, I mean, Montessori's view of math learning and development is that the central concept, the central difficulty in learning kind of advanced math, like computation and the operations and kind of getting from counting to math, is learning place value, learning what place value means. And it's not that, it's intuitive for adults. Like once you're kind of on the other side of it and you're like, a 1 here means something different from a 1 here. Like this 1 here means 10, and this 1 here means 1, and this 1 over here actually means 100. And if you put them all together, it's 111. For a child, that is like baffling. It's like wait, if you put a 1 here, you just have 1 1, and the ones mean something different. So it's this very complicated thing. And a lot of this is like, it's an order of magnitude increase in how you're representing number. It's a very complicated thing how we represent numbers. And Montessori figured out how to concretize this for children and to make it intuitively, visually, tactily accessible for children. And the simple mechanism is for all the Montessori math materials, and there are a lot, the golden beads are the best example. When you get up to 9 and go 1 more, something physically changes. The form of what you're doing changes. And so you have 9 beads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you get to 10 and you can't just add another bead. Now you replace those 9 beads with 10 beads that are glued together, that are kind of stuck together with a wire called a 10 bar. And that 10, it's a new 1. It's like a new entity, and it's something different. And you're kind of getting the sense of like, okay, I get to 10 and now it's a new 1 and I can collect 10s. You're getting tactily, visually the sense of place value. And that gets linked to the 10 boards and the teen boards. And that in turn gets linked to the large bead cabinet, where you start to learn like, okay, like if you have, let's say that you have 10 bars, now it's a square, like, oh, you're starting to, like, you don't teach children about like what it means to square something directly when they're 3, but they're getting it, they're getting the visual of it. And when they later learn, when you multiply a number by itself, that's squaring, they're like, oh yeah, like you're making a square, like that's actually what you're doing. And so brilliant, her math materials, again, like I think this is an underappreciated aspect of Montessori.
I didn't even learn that till I was
Right.
grown. I was like, oh, it actually makes a square. And then
Exactly, yeah.
yes, here they are getting to touch, what is a 2 squared and a 3 squared, and not necessarily naming it very quickly, but then you see and feel and connect, and it's that sensorial learning.
Yeah, and there's so many examples of that. I mean, it's very common if you actually go through the Montessori training or just read like the advanced Montessori method or her elementary curriculum to be like, oh my gosh, now I know what pi means. Like I always memorized it as like 3.14, but there's this Montessori exercise where it's like, okay, like if you unroll the circle and see how many diameters it makes, it's always 3 and a little bit. You know, like you can always count it out, and it's 3 and a little bit, no matter how big the circle is or how small the little is. That's interesting. That's like it's like a constant for a circle, no matter how it is, and you can see how that relates to the kind of different properties of a circle in various ways. And it's like that's not how I learned it. I learned 3.14, and I was a little nerd child, so I memorized the digits out to like 20 digits, 3.14159265 but I didn't know what it meant, right? And Montessori, you always understand at every level what you're doing, even though it's very, very advanced.
I would love for you, we have just a brief time, and I would
Yeah.
love for you to talk to us about the spirit of the child and how it wasn't about overlaying expectations, but about drawing forth the unique talents and interests from within.
Yeah. So the theme of this conference is transformation, right? Is that
Yes.
right? The kind of I have a mixed relationship with the word transformation. I really like it in a certain way because what I want is like a big change in education, like a really radical change. I think transformation is a good word for that. I also think that there's also continuity. It's not like if you go into Montessori training, there's a way that you get a new perspective and become a new person, but it's not like you're like sometimes people talk about it as though it's like a religious experience, which it has analogs to. But I don't think it's like everything that you used to think was wrong, and like you have to kind of reject your whole old life. And but the most kind of fundamental transformative perspective in Montessori, what that I do think is transformative, it's like a gestalt switch. Like you kind of thought you were seeing things in one way, and now you're seeing things in a different way. Is the perspective on the child. It's what is the child? What is the child capable of? What is the kind of nature of the child? What do they want? What do they need? What is the nature of development? Where is it going? And Montessori's observation across thousands of children and hundreds of classrooms and decades of pioneering work is that children have certain things in common with all human beings. They have a need for work and communication and connection. But they're at a different stage of development, one where they're kind of growing these things and where they're learning differently. And the fundamental through line in Montessori kind of in the developmental years up through adolescence is you are increasing in independence. Or increasing in independence. So you are, and not in that kind of simple way where it's like you can do more stuff, but like in a really profound way where you're increasing your capacity, yes, your skills, your capacity to do things successfully yourself, but that's also linked to your view of yourself, your confidence, your ability to take responsibility for yourself, your ability to manage your own emotions, your ability to discover and explore things on your own. And that, if that's the fundamental in education, the fundamental in education is you are building up your own capacity for kind of self-reliance, knowing things independently, thinking things through independently, valuing things independently, forming independently strong relationships with other people. There's no way to do that other than giving the child freedom to make those choices and to make mistakes and to kind of let them practice that independence. So you can't, I mean, Montessori's core insight is you can't kind of like all learning is self-learning, all development is self-creation. Like at core, this is something that we're here to help with and that we can help a lot with. Like I don't want to minimize the role of educators. It's not just like hands off and let the child do whatever they want. There's a tremendous amount of help and support that goes into it. But really it's about what the child is doing. The child is taking all of these inputs and working in these environments and taking this relationship with the guide is the Montessori word for teacher. And using all those things as inputs for this massively complicated internal process the child themselves are directing. And that is a mind shift. It's a big mind shift to be like, it's not that I'm telling the child to do something. It's not that I'm getting the child to do something. You might be inspiring the child to choose something. That can definitely happen. So it's not like you have no role in the motivation, but whatever the child can do and whatever the child learns is the child's achievement. It is not your achievement. Very, very indirectly, you helped, like you kind of provided scaffolding and inputs, but this is about what the child does. And embracing that is actually transformative for the child's experience. So it's transformative for you as a teacher because it's like now you're seeing children in a different way. But it's also transformative for the child because the child is now working with adults who understand that when the child achieves something, it's their achievement, and the child is then better able to experience their own development and growth as like a matter of self-success, as a matter of something that they've earned. So if you just take something simple like going from infancy to toddler, so learning to walk, every child learns how to walk, right? So and every child learns how to walk at roughly the same time. So like it's not like the Montessori method. Like maybe it gets in a few weeks earlier if you kind of do things the Montessori way, but it's not like wow, like Montessori teaches children how to walk faster, and that's the advantage. Every child learns how to walk, but there's a big difference in learning how to walk if there's an adult hovering over you all the time, and they put you in walkers, and they're like worried about you, and they're nervous about you, and they're always holding your hand, and they're always cooing over you, and they're always looming, and they're always crawling over you. And you learn how to walk when you do that. And in fact, when you learn how to walk, even when you do that, it's the child's achievement. Like the child had to figure it out and take the risks and take the steps and like learn how to balance themselves, but the child doesn't experience it as their own achievement. If there's an adult looming in this helicopter-like way, and they're constantly putting, these jumpers and walkers, the child, it's not natural for the child to be like, I did it. The child is like, other people kind of helped me do it, and I was dependent on those other people to do it. And so they don't get that confidence boost, versus doing it in a way where you really let the child take risks and do it on their own and explore. And when the child does something, you're like, wow, like you stepped up, you pulled yourself up on the couch, you did that. And that's what you're reinforcing. In both cases, the child is learning how to walk. In both cases, the child is learning how to walk at roughly the same pace. But in one case, the child is getting this massive soul boost from it. Like it's becoming part of them, that they can do these incredible things, that they can gain new powers by their own effort, and that the other people around them give them visibility into this. And in the other case, they don't get that, and they miss this opportunity to turn this universal human experience into the spiritual food, the spiritual fuel, and the spiritual fortification.
Wow, just such deep wisdom. So before we have to end, I would love for you to take us a little farther up the age scale and just help give us some strategies for people that want to instill these concepts, but perhaps work with an older age group. Like, how can we bring in some of the baseline concepts of Montessori into other environments?
So the baseline thing one of the main things that I've talked about is kind of uninterrupted work. And I do think that most traditional school structures, it's like you've got a 30-minute or a 45-minute block structure. Everybody's kind of given an assignment. You're working on the same things. This is hard to do, but children, just like adults, and this includes older children too, so like elementary children, teenagers, they need stretches of time where they can get into something and do it. Just like, how you as an adult, like in your job, in your life, like if you've got like a morning free, like 9 to 12 with nothing scheduled, you're like, oh my God, I can get so much accomplished. And then like one meeting appears on your calendar from like 10 to 10:15, like a 15-minute phone call. And it's like, now it's not like your morning is like 5% less productive or 10% less productive. It's like 50% less productive because of that one little interruption. And teenagers have that experience. Elementary children have that experience. They need stretches where they can like take the time to get into things and focus on things and do deep work. Then you need a kind of school schedule or school structure that enables that. You also need a kind of assignment structure or work structure that is conducive to that. So if the children are just looking through a textbook or just turning through worksheets, that's harder to do. So every change in this direction kind of precipitates other more radical changes. But I would say, like, as a starting point, think about your schedule. Think about the kinds of work that children are able to do and track and choose on their own. And think about how you can have like a culture of work, not a culture of doing whatever you want, but a culture of work, of like children who like have projects of their own that they get into, that they want to get right. Like that they're not just going to like write a short story because they're excited about it, but they're going to write a short story and revise it and like get their friends to like edit it so that it doesn't have typos, and then get it into a production where like it's in a nice final form where they've like followed through on a task. That is, again, to use the word transformative, like in this context, that's potentially transformative for a child in terms of what it gives them developmentally.
And it's
Paul Graham
certainly
has a good essay about this. He's not a Montessorian, but he's a startup investor. He has an essay called "A Project of One's Own," I think is what the essay is called. And he's talking about his children. Like he was so excited when his 11 or 12-year-old child was in the car coming home from school, and the only thing this child wanted to talk about is getting home so he could work on his writing project. And it's like that. How do you kind of build that into the school environment?
And it certainly unifies body, mind, and spirit, because then
Yeah.
the spirit of the child is so engaged doing it.
Yeah. And I should say, like, one more brief tangent. So I think of the mind as is basically the reasoning mind. It's your cognition, it's your capacity to think. Um, the body is like the hand, your capacity to do stuff. You're living in the world, you're acting, you're experiencing things. The spirit, Montessori uses the word spirit in a number of ways, and I can just tell you how I take it.
Okay.
The spirit, and this I use soul in this way too. I think it means the character of the child, like their personality, their habits, their kind of deep beliefs, their kind of automated perspectives on the world, not just what they consciously think in the moment, but what they've really, really internalized and automated. And everything in Montessori, and I think everything in education should be geared towards that, the spirit in that sense. Like education is about character development, it's about virtues, it's about deep habits, it's about who you are. By default, what are your dispositions? And this is an ancient idea, it goes straight back to Socrates, that education is about virtue. And I think Montessori is one of the very first people to like actually get it right and to think about what is it, what would it actually mean to have an education that gave children virtue in this deep way that affected children's character. And that is really fundamental in education. Education is not just about thinking in the mind and knowledge. It is about those things. It's not just about skills and the kinds of things you can do. It is about those things, but it's about doing those things in a way that fosters independence, that fosters generosity, that fosters honesty, that fosters work habits. I think work as a kind of industriousness is a really important virtue. And that's what education is about first and foremost.
Oh, and that's what we really need these days, always, indeed.
Yeah.
That is the basis for transformation when we feel that
Yeah.
power,
I think transformation is transformation of character.
connection within.
Yeah. I think transformation, as far as I like the term, it's transformation of character. It's like deep change of your character, of your habits, of your virtues. And it's that kind of deep character work.
And I will just testify, for me as a teacher, it did start with a lot of work within, and that
Yeah.
we had to do that path first. I want to honor your time. I am so grateful for the rich knowledge base you bring. And I wanted to mention that you said that you had done a course of history of education
Yeah.
that you would be willing to share.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of this course. So when I first, I'm trained as I'm trained as an intellectual historian. Like I did a PhD in philosophy with a focus on the history of philosophy. And so when I first got into Montessori about 10 years ago, I didn't know anything about Montessori. Like my first instinct, I was like, what is this amazing methodology? I know how I'm going to figure out. I'm going to read all of her books and all of her epistolary and all of her critics and like get into the history of this thinker. And I have done that, and I've still done that. I'm still doing that. But I wasn't really satisfied with any of the resources out there. I don't think that there are that many people doing, there are some, but doing really great work on the history of education. And the people that are doing great work are typically ignorant of Montessori. And so I put together this course that's 2,600 years of the history of education. We go back to the 6th century BC with the kind of emergence of education in ancient Greece, in this kind of culture that's becoming more and more literary. And we go straight up to the present. And we talk about a lot of different trends in education. There's a focus on pedagogy. I'm like, what is the curriculum? What is the pedagogy? What is the philosophy? It's not so much about policy, though. We do get into like who is getting educated, what is the policy, what is the structures a little bit on this historical context. But there's a whole lecture. It's a 12 lecture series. There's a whole lecture about Montessori, and a big aim of mine in the course is to make sense of what is unique about Montessori in history. What are the continuities? What are the discontinuities? And like kind of how does she fit into this overall picture of the story of education? And yeah, I will provide you with a link or the contact information to get access to that course. I would be happy for more people to take it.
Okay, that will be in the backlinks of your information as we share word about this conference and word about you. And again, your website, Montessorium.com. This is Dr. Matt Bateman, and he is the executive director of Montessorium, which is the think tank for a higher ground education and guidepost Montessori schools. A wealth of information. I'm really grateful for your time. I could go on with this conversation for a whole lot longer. Are there any remaining pearls of wisdom that you would like to share? I mean, you have a wealth of them.
Gosh, remaining pearls of wisdom. You've gotten a lot of them out of me. I mean, I guess I would say that just again, putting on my kind of philosopher academic hat, um, I have found that it is if you're interested in kind of philosophy, or you're interested in intellectual history, you're interested in like developmental psychology, like who are the big thinkers, what is the big idea, what are the big ideas, I have really found it rewarding to do a deep dive into Montessori. Like she is one of these thinkers that is very rich and complex, that's very hard to summarize in pithy ways, like even at the kind of level of practice or implementation, that like she just gets issues with a level of depth and nuance where like you read her books and you reread them. And so if there are any of you out there who are listening who are kind of find that thought inspiring and encouraging, like I would encourage you to do it. Like, I mean, history course is a good start for just kind of historical context, because she was doing her writing 100 years ago, so she was a kind of historical thinker at this point. But read the Discovery of the Child, read the Advanced Montessori Method, like read her as a thinker and a philosopher. And I think you will find that it's valuable for your practice as an educator or parent, and also just valuable for you. Like she just has a perspective on the human condition, on human society, on human civilization that is unique, and that I find to be really resonant, and not it's not that easy to find. I don't think that that aligns like perfectly with any kind of common view today, any common religious view or political view or philosophical view. It's a kind of unique position philosophically that is very, very worthwhile.
I testify to that. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And I definitely hope people take advantage of that offer, because it's a generous one, a whole course, an academic course that you've taught repeatedly, right?
Yeah, I've taught it twice now. I'm not sure when the next time I'm going to teach it again is. So we're going to give you access to the best version of the recordings, and you can, you can watch the videos. You can listen to it as a podcast. There are readings associated with it too, if you want to kind of do a deep dive and get into the readings. But it's like 18 hours of content probably.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I say namaste to you.
Namaste. Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
A true pleasure indeed for me.